Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. Today's episode is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to explore the topic of the Deva. The Deva, originally defined in Sanskrit, means heavenly, divine, anything of excellence, and is also one of the terms for a deity in Hinduism. Deva is a masculine term. The feminine equivalent is Devai. And Quo talks about it. We're going to read a little bit of Quo. We're going to read a little bit of M, who wrote The Dayspring of Youth and The Lord God of Truth Within, this amazing anonymous writer that spoke of different elementals and deities. In the earliest Vedic literature, all supernatural beings are called Devas and Asuras. The concept and legends evolved in ancient Indian literature, and by the late Vedic period, benevolent supernatural beings are referred to as Deva Asuras. In post-Vedic texts, such as the Puranas and the Itihasas of Hinduism, the Devas represent the good and the Asuras the bad. When I say Deva, I'm not talking about Beyonce, I'm talking about D-E-V-A. Now, in some medieval Indian literature, Devas are also referred to as Suras and contrasted with their equally powerful but malevolent half-brothers referred to as the Asuras. Some of this literature we may refer to, and we get the origination of demons and nature spirits and Rakshasas or ghoulish ogres, which are part of Indian mythology. It's interesting, when you look up Deva, you will find a definition that says that Indian religion finds them benevolent, and in Zoroastrianism, it's evil. And in general, it's also used as a term for God. The reason I find it interesting is in the Quo material. We're going to read some Quo here. In the Quo material, they explain that in the fourth density, when you move to this next dimension, one of the shocking things is you can see the Devas. They're available to your visual, you can understand them. And so it's this whole other world that we are not ready for, very much like in DMT, the elves that people see. Perhaps they are Devas. That's the question I'd love to ask and understand. But you can find it in Sanskrit and Balinese and Bengali and Kannada and so many different languages. And there's so much literature, the Samhitas and the Brahmanas, and there are important Devas in the literature. There's Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver. Shiva is a Deva, the destroyer, and Ganesha, the deity of intelligence. We also could look at the Greek gods as Devas, just they didn't use the word Deva. So what does it all mean? I wanted to talk about this in particular to have the opportunity to read the Quo material, and also to go beyond that and expand on this author M, who we will definitely read more of. This amazing book called Dayspring of Youth has very specific instructions on how the universe is created, and it talks about the different kinds of atoms, and it talks about the different Devas and elemental spirits and these different spirits that make up this fourth dimension, I believe. And so when it happens, when we do a shift, and if it's sudden or you awaken in fourth density and you see these beings, it's all good. Relax. You may think it's a scary thing. It's not. So let's look at what Quo has to say to begin with. And the question they asked Quo, who is a channeled source from a social memory complex, which has combined different multi-social memory complexes, and they answer spiritual material when channeled by Carla and several others in the LL Research Institute that also channeled the Law of One material and the raw material. Check out my previous episodes on Quo. Quo is wonderful and amazing, and every time I read it, I find out something new. So the question asked was, our question today, Quo has to do with the Devas in the, shall we say, astral world, the Devacanonic realms. We would like for you to give us some information about the inhabitants there. We are aware somewhat that there are angels of very high order, there are regular spirits that are associated with the natural world, the spirits of fire, of water, of earth, of air, and we are certain that there are others as well. We would like for you to give us an idea of the kinds of entities that inhabit the Devaconic realms. Carla Channeling says, "We are those of the principle known to you as Quo, and we greet you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator in whose name we serve. We thank you each for creating this space in this day of rest to have this session of working, and especially so since we realize the many demands upon the time of each of you. We thank you for your dedication to seeking and your generosity of spirit. And we thank you for sharing your meditation with us. It is a great privilege to be with you. As always, we ask that you use your discrimination in listening to what we have to say, recognizing and resonating to those thoughts that appeal to you, and leaving the rest behind. This day, your question was somewhat mixed in that we are aware of various names of various of the creatures about which you have asked. And we are also aware that in terms of the terminology of this area of discussion, the naming of some beings is not consonant with the naming of other beings in terms of the astral and devaconic planes, which are only a small part of the inner planes. However, we assume that the question was intended to be general and to speak of the inner planes in toto, as opposed to 2 of the 7. Indeed, our discussion would be very much the same. However, we would not be talking about the wide range of non-human entities that inhabit the great range of inner planes that is local to this particular sphere of your earth. Our answer depends upon an initial awareness concerning the nature of the Creator and the creation. This nature is such that, as this instrument was told by the one known as David, the matter which has been considered by those among your people called scientists for some years as a vacuum has been proven now by your scientists to contain more energy by far than the energy which is released both from within, what you call matter, such as your bodies or any atom that can be split. The unpotentiated resting energy of the creation is so powerful that the power released in your hydrogen bombs is very small in comparison to the power that could be released from undistorted, unpotentiated time-space. When there is the creation within third density of life forms such as yourselves, there is an entry into a world of limitation and polarity. Within the inner planes of third density, however, this limitation is not there, for the inner planes resonate within the energy of the planet itself, which creates, at the moment of its beginning, all the planes in completion as a pattern, which through the illusion of space-time seems then to begin to appear and develop and so forth. This again, in the visual world, is one of the limitations of your space-time. The conditions in time-space are quite different, and consequently, there is not the bar against remembering and being completely aware of the metaphysical nature of what this instrument would call a deeper reality, and the passing nature of all things which participate within this world of life and death. The energy of, say, the tree or a person may be seen in the context of this deeper reality as a minor distortion in the flow of unpotentiated time-space. The illusion that is so pointed and so emphatic to the physical eyes which you enjoy is in fact very little different from, but quite pointedly different from, unpotentiated time-space. This means that each being of third density has barely leashed within her energy system the ability, literally, to move mountains or to make any physical changes by consciousness alone that her imagination and will can focus upon to a great enough extent, with great enough purity of desire, and with a great enough sense of purpose. The limited intake of information within third density is that limitation which affects the conscious mind. It does not affect the subconscious mind except in the higher levels of the subconscious mind. Therefore, it is seldom that entities do see those beings of the inner planes with their physical eyes. Indeed, most of those who see the inner planes entities, while conscious, are those who this instrument would call children, those who have not been trained that such things are impossible to see. Further, there is the necessity for retaining an unprovability about all such beings that would increase a third density entity's faith. In matters of faith and in spiritual matters in general, there is a great desire not to infringe upon the free will of any entity who is within third density specifically to make choices. Now, with this view of the third density situation and the situation of third density biological units such as yourselves, it is perhaps easier to see that the vast array of very real and very substantive intelligence and spirit that the energy of the one infinite creator possesses almost bursts out of each tiny nook and cranny of each distortion. Life calls to life, and life within third density space-time calls to life within the inner planes. The inner planes life calls to and seeks to serve third density space-time beings. The nature of angels is not qualitatively different from the essence of beings such as fairies, pixies, Puck, Robin Greenfellow, and all such kindly and jovial spirits. And then moving to the Devas within all living things of second density and all of those elemental energies of earth, air, wind, and fire from first density. All of these energies may be seen either as a focused energy that is attached, as if by a magnet, by certain states of mind in space-time, or they may be seen as intelligences, which are drawn by likeness of interest or likeness of vibration into a harmony and an association. Each of you being a significant, though small distortion within the time-space and space-time continua. You, naturally, by your very existence, draw energy and intelligence from the inner planes. Because of the limitations of the space-time mind or intelligence of third density entities, there is always the tendency to set the same conditions upon other life as are experienced by the life of the self. This is created through many centuries, the naming of vast panoplies of beings of a certain order. For instance, as the one known as V has pointed out, there is a very careful and very large order of various types of angelic beings. There are, in other systems of myth and magic, many names for interplane guides, many names for nature spirits, many names for elemental spirits. They are essences, which are beyond the naming, much as you yourselves are essences beyond the naming, because they have not relationship whatsoever with space-time, being completely creatures of thought. They are moved by thoughts, being creatures of energy. They are moved by energy. The details of desire within third density beings do not concern those being of the inner planes that wish to interact with humankind. As much as the energy behind the desire for a particular thing, it is the intent, the purpose, the aim that attracts like energy for inner planes to work. When you wish help, the only bar to that help is the lack of solid knowing that help is available. It is much more difficult for inner planes entities to aid humankind if the human is not aware of or calling upon that help. Consequently, we encourage each never to spend the time wondering if such help is available. In our opinion, the universe is literally bursting at the seams with energy and information, and all of it desires to be known. All of it desires to be used. It is at the point of reception by the third density biological entities that the problems occur. A large amount of help goes unused because it is unasked for and unregarded. Much help from the higher angelic realms is only available to those who ask. For as the energies become more refined and the intelligence is more full of the infinite creator, there is an increasing responsibility for preserving the free will of the fragile third density human entities who are moving through this choice-making density. How greatly each entity's guidance system wishes to help. We give this instrument the image of a dozen angels sitting all about the living room on curtain rods and windowsills and tops of bookcases, just hoping and waiting to be asked. The nature spirits and elementals are not concerned with the infringement upon free will, because they are called only by those who know they are possible, either those whose faith has not been tested at all, such as the smaller children, or those whose faith has been tested and has been tempered in the fire, so that there is a knowing that this aspect of intelligence and energy within things exists. The next question was, if one wanted to ask for help from a particular angel or from the elementals, how would one go about protecting oneself and trying to be sure that you are getting positive, creator-oriented help? I am Quo, and I am aware of your query. We would recommend that the petition for assistance be made while in the meditative state. In the state, you may communicate that which is your heart's desire most clearly to those whose ears and hearts are inclined to a call for service. As you issue the call, having centered yourself and having made known that which is your desire in asking for assistance, then we would suggest the engaging of a period of silent meditation wherein you would wait for contact and assistance, shall we say, that is communicated to you through your feelings, through images, or through intuition. That when this contact is perceived, you ask kindly but firmly if it comes in the name of, and then you would supply that quality, entity, or concept which is sacred to you, be it Jesus, the Christ consciousness, the positive polarity, any of the various saints who have made themselves known as intermediaries in these kinds of situations, and so forth. When you have received an affirmative reply, then you may know that you have made contact with an entity which is both willing and able to assist you in the manner that you desire. Carla follows up and says, when I was channeling before, I was getting this image of the energies that are a part of everything that you can imagine. I was thinking that we get some kind of way to tell what was from first density, what was from second and third, so forth, in terms of the inner planes. And I was getting the impression that all of these carefully written down things that various monks and various peoples have seen through the centuries and written exhaustively about are actually very biased material in terms of culture and so forth. And that was why they wanted to stay completely away from the forms, because these energies, although they would take any form that was comfortable to you, it wouldn't be their real selves. Is that an accurate perception? Is that why you didn't want to be more specific? And Quo says, I am Quo, and I am aware of your query, my sister. And you are quite correct, for each culture contains biases, and indeed within many cultures there are various teachers, gurus, masters, etc., who have experienced these types of energy essences and beings of light, and who have given them names that are either culturally biased or personally significant, and which do not translate well into another culture of experience. Thus we thought to remain in a general fashion of description, so that there could be a transmission of information that was hopefully free of unnecessary distortion that would be confusing. In another session in 2009, there is a reference to Devas that says they are thought forms. Other examples of a thought form are the nature spirit, Deva, gnome, or pixie. All of those creatures are easily dismissed by an entity who wishes to measure and judge the physical creation by empirical means only. However, all of these forms of disembodied life are real, in the same way that your energy body is real. There are those who can see the pulsing colors of the energy body, and there are those who can see the fairies, gnomes, and pixies. There are those who dance with the devas and nature spirits, for they have been gifted with a broader and a deeper sight than their physical eyes will allow. I next wanted to read, for the first time on The Reality Revolution, from M. That was the name of the author. There are lots of theories. There's nothing definitive publicly known about the author M. The author M worked with Blavatsky and several others back in the day. This was written in the 30s, but there are theories, but none have been proven as to who it really is. In the original book, Dayspring of Youth, claims to come from the higher realms. And as I read more, it's just incredibly fascinating. There's 2 chapters in the second book, and as far as I can tell, there's only 2 books written by M. And the second was called The Lord God of Truth Within. And there are 2 chapters on the Devas. And the first is Deva Guidance, a Key to Nature. As you seek union with the truth, think also of the Devic creation, with which you have had much intimate relationship in the past. This is a composite form of intelligence, which, if you can bring it into your atmosphere, will devitalize the opposition that may come into your presence. In seeking union with the Deva, remember that you are endeavoring to contact the intelligence of an angelic being that exists in an atmosphere or vibration quite foreign and in opposition to the sovereignty of your own place in the physical and mental divisions of your world. Few people are able to assimilate the Deva consciousness, for its power is tremendous and disturbing to the human atmosphere. Seek always to glorify God through these beings or intelligences, for they represent all the nobler standards and ideals to which few men can attain. Therefore, watch that their presence may be known to you, for in the beginning you will get intermittent vibrations from their plane. These Devic intelligence can bring you the deeper truths which lie behind the foundations of all society. When you feel such a vibration, let nothing disturb the tranquility of your mind. Seek union with God through these vibrations, for there is a great need for such union with your man in nature. The Deva itself is not always conscious of your approach, and you must seek to absorb as much of its consciousness as possible so that a bindery link may be formed between its consciousness and yours. This will open to you certain divisions of your nature with which you are little acquainted, and remember that within its atmosphere is the brooding spirit which unifies all things in nature's creation. This is a discovery to which you must attain, for without its power it would be hard to assume any positions of real importance in the world. This has been symbolically referred to as the herald of the dawn, to this new age of discovery into which you are awakening. Your world is foreign to the Deva's nature, which has a high standard and witnesses the illusion which man fails to perceive. To those who have the potentialities for reading and understanding the book of nature, the doctrine of the spirit will unfold itself. The great book of emancipation is given to those who can read, assimilate, and understand the real nature of their being. The Devas, in an age of corruption and wrongdoing, are composed of those atoms which are witnesses of the law. They understand how wrongdoing developed in humanity and witnesses things which cannot be perceived by the human mind. When the student allies himself with nature's understanding, he will have a vision which is threefold. With a reference to the nature of its being, he will see the beginning and the emergence of a thing into the truth. He will perceive the law of cause and effect operating through it while in being, and will realize there is also a power with which will retire and disintegrate it. It is necessary that you should unite yourself with the middle kingdom within your nature of being, for here the Deva can assimilate itself with the outer covering of your atmosphere, so that its presence can be felt, and the activities of its spirit be known to you. In other words, that which is above unites itself with that which is below, and that which is below unites itself with that which is above. Thereby a common ground of understanding is made known to your human consciousness. You must take a great deal of care in seeking to enter and analyze the nature of truth on its plane, and you must endeavor to sense the relationship which exists between the world of being and that of your lower counterpart, which is the world of humanity at large. Remember also that this division in nature, symbolized by the Devic consciousness, exists in parallel within the finer nature of your being, and in order to unify yourself with this consciousness, you must travel inwardly towards the source and center of your being. You must also realize that you have within yourself this great emancipation book of the universe, and when you wish to bring its material into the light of your day, you must aspire inwardly for its manifestation. To enter into nature's consciousness, you must seek out the inner things of the spirit, and not cast your thought outwardly into the atmosphere of the so-called conscious nature which you behold and analyze with your senses. Deep down within man are those streams of energy which bring to birth in humanity fountains of expression through the voice of literature. There is one thing which you do not realize, and that is the aid of that instrument in nature which you have in your keeping. You have a part and place in the reorganization of human conduct. This power is given you so that you may be able to discriminate between that which is false and that which partakes of the truth. Through Devic guidance, man comes to realize that the cell life and atoms which are to be found in his composition have their corresponding positions in the 7 divisions of nature, and that he corresponds to nature's embodiment and is a part of her manifestation. Man, in his waking consciousness, has little realization of nature's divisions of consciousness. At so-called death, however, man makes the discovery that he is a part of nature, and he passes through a period of being reborn into her consciousness. This is why people who have passed over find it difficult to adjust themselves to the new environment. After the age of 7 years, when boys and girls merge themselves deeper into the consciousness of this physical and mental world, nature withdraws from them, although a few people retain their link with nature's consciousness during their human life. This is a point we wish to emphasize. When man passes from this earth plane at death, he is slowly reborn into that plane of consciousness through which he had passed before incarnation. He also finds that the more developed aspirers for truth pass quickly into the nature of their being, and that is why they seldom communicate with their loved ones on this earth. Humanity in general is not aware that when we pass out of body in sleep, we can, if worthy, associate in the finer spheres of nature with those whom we love. But when we come back into the confusion of this world, we do not retain, unless trained, the memory of our conversations with those who are now evolving in the finer states of consciousness. When the ignorant person with a strong passion and desire nature concentrates upon the loved one who has passed on, he is unconsciously creating a line of communication as in earth life. He is breaking a law of nature by this desire, for with the force of his longing and desire, by personal domination, he is pulling the departed back into the density of our world atmosphere. Often by concentration of desire upon a beloved one who has found peace and tranquility in the finer essence of matter, he is drawn back into our world of tumult and disaster, perhaps into the family atmosphere of self-pity and sorrow, and this will cause acute suffering. If the chamber house of memory could be entered by the ordinary mind, there would return to us memories of those spheres from which we came, memories which usually disappear within 7 years after birth. The little child in his pram can talk to the yogi by telepathy, and often, in the presence of a baby, you are listening to the inarticulate utterances of a wise man or woman. I have often felt myself in the presence of a sage whose soul was imprisoned and bound in the inarticulate body of the child. We are often asked by the unborn child to inform its mother what food it needs for the deficiencies of its body, or the type of books its mother should read to it. It will sometimes tell us when it was last incarnated. These unborn babies will often converse with you in the tongue of their last incarnation, and one said to me, "Tell mother what my body will be deficient in a certain property which swine's flesh fed on acorns will give me." It spoke in Old English, and it told me that it wished to be named Alfreda. These unborn babes will also inform you of the things which should not be done to the child as a baby because of prenatal shocks. For instance, a pregnant woman got a chill from the water being too cold in her bath. This sudden immersion caused the unborn child to suffer. After this child was born, the mother, forgetting this incident, squeezed a sponge full of cold water over its head in its bath. The baby became hysterical with fear, and then she remembered the warning. Sometimes when the child passes on at birth, it will ask that the mother should be given the message, "I will try to come again." The yogi often converses with these souls who are to incarnate, and he becomes quite attached to them, for they are whimsical like the little people, the fairies in nature, and bring a purity into his atmosphere. We seldom see these children seeking incarnation in the atmospheres of men and women of evil nature. In such atmospheres, we see half-developed and half-human entities, which seldom show themselves more than a foot above the ground, crawling in the slime of a dank and fetid pool. These are the denizens of the underworld who seek an entrance into our spheres of consciousness. Often we see malformations which can be applied to the human frame, creations consisting of a combination of the animal and human of the lower elemental worlds. These forms often inflict themselves upon a sensitive man on waking. They seek to becloud the sensitive with their atmosphere and try to influence his personality by contacting him with some other character which is not of the nature of his being. An evil man who died a leper brought his atmosphere to impress me with the vision of what was once his face and asked me to help. When such as one asks for help, it should be given freely. In time, you'll learn to love these poor monstrosities whom disease has malformed as you observe the slow awakening of their bedimmed consciousness. They tell us there are very few who will love and help them, and that many drive them away. The yogi often finds himself speaking to vast audiences in those spheres where the light is dark. I know a lady who is very much of this world, but out of the body. I've listened to her orations to great audiences in a world where midday is like a London fog. Many people unrecognized in this world are working out of the body in deeper states of consciousness to bring the hope of peace to these people of the underworld. One of the severest trials of the yoga student is the conquest of fear. For when he has attained to a slight degree of consciousness of the light, the moths of the underworld see it and flutter about his candle. Many sensitive people suddenly seeing apparitions have suffered shock. The less cultured members of society who loved coarse jokes when earthbound like to try their jokes on sensitives who can see them. They are like boys who hide behind trees and jump out with a shout upon some lovelorn swain to give him a fright. Their antics resemble the sadism which most boys display at about the age of 14. So we find these jokers dressing themselves up as pirates or highwaymen and trying to frighten the sensitive. Whenever you see an apparition of this kind, quietly send your love to it, and then it will reveal its true nature, whether good or evil. I was once privileged to sleep for 6 months in a hut in a churchyard, and my work each night before going to bed was to go through the churchyard to break, when merited, the linga sharita thread which held the astral body to the corpses. The clergy in the Protestant churches know little of the science of liberating the soul from its tomb, but in the olden days, the sonorous intonations of the Mass and the tolling of the church bells brought this about. This is why cremation should be abdicated, as this releases the astral body from the corpse. When a man died in the early Christian days, if the priest considered him worthy, he could be helped out of the body and piloted through 3 purgatorial belts of illusion which surround our earth. Among the death scenes I've witnessed, I find that the seemingly devout Christian fights for life. He is afraid of death, which should be welcomed. If a man earnestly aspires for truth, there is nothing to fear in death, for it is an awakening into those spheres which his just deserts merit. People will dogmatically state that they expect after death, yet, because they never take the trouble to observe things about their physical plane, they know little about life. If people realized that emanations of a lower elemental nature arise from churchyards, they would not bury the dead in the midst of the living. Sometimes, ill people are taken into hospitals or nursing homes and placed on a bed in which a person has recently died. The room may have been used for some time and magnetized by the thoughts of the former occupant. A normal person placed on that bed for a minor operation, if sensitive, may take upon himself the atmosphere which his predecessor left behind. The room may have been properly cleaned and disinfected, but a person who has passed out in a state of delirium seeks to return to his old bed, and it is difficult to remove such an atmosphere. In my travels, I have often found a bed which I was to sleep in already occupied by the passion and desire of a being who would ask me what I was doing in his room. He did not realize that he was dead. Also, I have found supposedly uninhabited houses haunted by old people who have passed over. It is their passion and desire body, known as a spirit, which remains behind. We find also through clairvoyance that the astral form of an old building, which has been pulled down, still exists, although another house may have been erected on that spot. This astral form is often inhabited by a spirit who may tell you there is a bag of sovereigns back of the skirting board behind the washstand, even although to the normal eye there is no washstand. Clairvoyantly, however, we could seek a fragment of the old room with its green washstand. When we mentioned the green washstand in the spirit, an old lady, in great excitement, said, "Yes, it is there." She had been a miser and did not realize that another building had been erected upon the site of her old home. A miser is difficult to help. Sometimes we also talk to the gnomes, an elemental people whose habitat is the mineral kingdom. They may take you to a very old ruin which then remains as it was in the days of prosperity, for its astral form still remains intact. Perhaps they will show you where things of value were hidden in the past and are often surprised that you cannot see things which they register. They may show you treasure which to them remains intact, as well as treasure for which our living friends may possess. In Scotland, one of these friendly gnomes accurately described to me the treasure chest of an old Scottish family, and when I went to see his friend and told her what the gnome had said, she got the chest, which she had not been opened for 2.5 years. We found the gnome had been accurate in his description. He had particularly described an ornament that had once belonged to the Bruce. In speaking of my friends, he would say that the bodies were made up of precious stones and certain minerals. I wish that humanity in general were as honest as my friend the gnome. While he could magnify the qualities of sincerity and honesty, the charming thing about him was his enthusiasm over everything which was going on around him. He had the wisdom of an old man and the enthusiasm of a child, and he had the power of foretelling whenever I was going to travel into the land of the fairy folk. He could tell me where the elemental conditions were good and where they were evil, and he also told me to be aware of the gnomes that had potbellies and legs like frogs. His great interest lay in the Christian religion and its observances. He knew a great deal about the secrets of levitation, which he called a change of vibration, or the bringing into the student of a vibratory arc, where the lines of vibration converge to one point to counteract the pressure of the earth traveling through space. He did not speak of gravitation as we know it, and I asked him if a man standing at the North or South Pole would be blown off the earth. He replied, "That force which is back of the vacuum pushes the earth along." He told me also that this force which propels the earth will propel the airplanes of the future, and that the Atlanteans of old knew this secret. He said that the future airplane, when it gets this push from that which is back of the vacuum, will propel itself, and that its design will be quite different from that of today. He often spoke as if the earth propelled itself through space. I do not know if he is correct, for I have never investigated the source of this information. This gnome was educated by the monks in St. Edmund's time, and had access to books which have passed beyond our ken. He would often bring these books to me, and putting on a pair of spectacles to appear wise, he would read me what the ancients had written. Whenever I told him that I was going to Ireland, he would dance with glee and go through a pantomime showing the pains and sorrows of the people there. He said that the gods walk there in the sheltered places at daybreak. He is cosmic in his happiness, as well as in his sorrow, and his consciousness seemingly extends over a long range of time. Although he is fond of bedecking me with ornaments and will suggest certain qualities and virtues which he wishes me to attain, he also brings a touch of sadness. He hopes that I may attain to the light which is back of all creation. He sometimes gives me a blessing as if he were a prelate, but I cannot analyze the kind of prelate that he wishes to express, for his costume was of a period which I did not recognize. It was rather like some old Celtic priest. Then he changed to the period of St. Alban. When departing, he always shakes his hands together. Vedic doorways to truth. The student, as he travels from north towards the equator and from the east towards the west, passing from one country to another, will notice a change in elemental nature. The Devas assume a costume of the nature of the division in which they have taken up their habitat. The costume in which they clothe themselves when appearing to a student is most pleasing. As each country differs in character, the Devas clothe themselves in color, and each costume differs. For instance, to the artists, the Devas, especially the three great ones who are working over Ireland, portray themselves in a deeper range of color from that which we find in England or America. The Irish Devas show themselves in a color which is of a strong metallic hue, such as we see in early stained glass windows, and the greatest density is at the bottom of their robes, where you see the metallic blues and greens which decrease and become lighter as you approach the head. The highlights of the folds of the costume are of a pinkish gray. We sometimes get this effect in fabrics, woven in two colors, like in shot silk, the folds appearing gray when two colors are complementary. The Devas in Ireland impress you with the depth of their knowledge of the past, present, and future. They show you their work in bringing peace out of disturbed conditions, and they will impress you with the conglomerate foundation of races, which they divide roughly into two divisions classified as good and evil. They will show you good influences in races, nullifying disturbing ones, such as the dwellers in darkness have left behind them. They will show you the golden age long before Christianity, and also the renaissance of that age in the early Christian days. Ireland today is still a place of pagan worship. At the side of its holy wells are to be found bushes and trees, hung strips of clothing from the diseased bodies of those who pray for help at these shrines. Later Christianity invariably built churches on holy places of pagan origin, for the early saints knew the efficacy of these sacred places. At the rock of Cashel today stands an ancient Druidic altar on which the Munster kings were crowned. Placed on it is one of the earliest Christian crosses, on which the figure of Jesus is clothed, as is always found on the earliest crosses of Ireland. The Irish Devas are the storehouse of great wisdom knowledge. They instruct the student how the lower knowledge of the four masters, the manipulation of nature's elements, came into the hands of the early monks who were interested in ceremonial magic. Through the book of the Four Masters, they gained scientific knowledge, which the renegade monks practiced secretly. In time, this book was withdrawn by nature, for its knowledge was used illegitimately. The Devas say that instead of becoming a bringer of light, it became the curse of Ireland. Few people know today that the renegade monks could put a curse upon the people who had plundered their seats of learning. These curses have lasted to the third and fourth generation. In some manner, good may become evil. There is a similarity between the lower counterpart of the Four Masters and the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Thus Druidic knowledge filtered into early Christian minds. The Devas say that a greater poetess will be born in Ireland, a liberator of the mind of the world, and that her music, strange to say, can be heard today rising out of the earth. This poetess will descend deep into the earth to bring back the gods of wisdom and understanding, like Orpheus and his lute. One of the Devas often makes his appearance holding a child in his arms, a girl who will once again bring music to this land. In the Highlands of Scotland, the Devas show you strong men leaving the land and going across the sea in many directions, like militant beings with sheathed swords. They will also show you the ancient maps of Britain and Ireland bound together to the continent of Europe. And they impress you with the brooding of the spirit over Ireland, Scotland, and Wales and England. They impress you with the heel of the Roman law and scales of justice, but the scales they show you are not yet balanced. In America, you find the Devas working through the youthful minds of humanity, and they show you symbolically a handful of grain being thrown over the land, and then the finer kernels are gathered together and sifted, each kernel according to its stature and strength, and then the sun is shown shining upon them, symbolizing the sifting and gathering together of the more advanced types of youthful minds. The moon has a great influence over the treasure house in nature, for the beings who came over from the moon passed rapidly through the densities of matter and progressed into states of consciousness far beyond mankind. But they left their wisdom records behind them in nature's treasure house. It is from this chalice in nature's keeping that the Devas can draw information for the yogi, if he will live according to their standards. If he does not so live, this knowledge, this wisdom of nature is forbidden to him. Surrounded by illusion and ignorance, the knowledge and comprehension to which we have attained is very small, compared to the knowledge and comprehension of the Devas. For those sentient beings stand always in the presence of truth. The student quickly discovers this when he can enter into a higher and finer atmosphere by going inwardly towards his own kingdom of heaven. You can feel two divisions of comprehension when you place your hand upon an ancient Druidic altar which has not been defiled by modern man. Its vibration separates you from your own time and separates you with a splendor and brightness alien to our age. You discover vibrating through your perception which carries you beyond ordinary realms of thought, a cosmic consciousness, that God is not apart from his creation, that God is within everything that our senses register. We reverence that learning and perception which the Druids derived from nature. We are told that much of this information is about to be revealed through the younger members of their torch and early Christian chivalry symbolized by King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table will acquire deep significance. The man in the street little realizes these changes that are intermittently going on around him, or that he is undergoing a change. He must learn that nature changes rapidly and that evolution is not gradual but intermittent. Geologists have discovered that ore deposits, especially copper, which 30 years ago were passed as low grade, have suddenly become first class. The alchemical drawings stress the four winds east and west, north and south, and in the yoga teaching, though veiled and hidden, great stress was laid upon these winds of heaven. In the physical transmutation of baser metals into gold, great stress was laid upon the recognition of these movements in nature and of the moment they began their operation. The yoga student, through observation, should know when to tune in to these currents in order to attain to their moments of instruction. Nature revealed her instruction to the alchemists of old, who were less worthy, and they knew the grandeur which surrounded them when they sought to harmonize themselves with nature and God. It was from this source that the great alchemists were able to perfect their art, for in their yoga practice, they were able to receive that instruction which brought them to God realization. They were taught how to see into a thing and realize its activity and position in nature's movements, and by perceiving the spirit which works through all things, the realization came. Few people question themselves as to the meaning of life and as to where we are all going and why we are chained to this world of illusion. But the student should take notice of what is going on around him and find out toward what goal all things are striving. The sage says, "Go and seek knowledge, for the attainment of wisdom is the end of all things." Does the student realize that moments are precious? Does he ever consider that this world is but a schoolroom of experience? Some are eager to know the truth, but many allow it to pass unheeded. There are many doorways leading to the truth, but each individual must find his own and learn how to knock thereon, how to ask admittance that he may receive the realization of truth and to attain to a finer perception. There is a doorway to nature through which the student gains a wonderful realization of the truth which is in all things. To enter, he must seek to know himself, to be true to himself, to be honest with himself. He must also be honest with nature and with his fellow man. The bringers of light who are within nature will always stimulate the student to aspire to his sovereign gold. He must pass through the door of honesty before he can stand in the presence of those upon whom truth shines. The student is not ready until he seeks truth and honesty in all things. Aspiration for truth gives him the power of perceiving the truth and falsity in other people. He must face the world in the attitude of a child, seeing and seeking the good in all things. Through his perception of truth, he has learned that most of his own sufferings have come to him from his own spoken words. For as he brings himself into a closer union with his own Lord God of truth within, he becomes doubly sensitive to the things set in motion by his spoken words. In moments of anger, therefore, the student must learn patience and carefully guard his speech. There are many invisible powers in nature which direct a man, and he may receive aid from those more evolved. Sometimes 4 or 5 people will enter a person's life in order to bring him the right contact, which will bring greater assistance in his higher development. This is a thing learned in yoga. You may have great admiration for the work a certain person has produced, and you feel intuitively that an invisible link is drawing you towards him. Then watch for contacts, and if you are patient, you will find invariably that the meeting of a number of different people will be the means of contacting the friend of your desire. But if you are impatient with the contacts that you meet, you disorganize the work of nature, and probably the soul that you are seeking is not contacted. A person may be listening to the performance of a great musician and may turn suddenly to a friend and say intuitively, "I'm going to meet this artist someday." If the student is sincere in his practice, he will contact those who will assist him in his quest for knowledge and the greater wisdom. A man came hurriedly into the home of a student who was busily engaged on his own work. The student lost his temper and was not as patient and courteous as he should have been. That night, a great teacher visited him and suggested that he had been most impatient that day. The whole career of his visitor had changed, for he had given way to his lower nature when he found no help coming to him from the student. To make up for this, the student labored for over a year to assist that man, but the man knew it not. We are not conscious at first of the instruments which our higher self uses in nature to assist us on our path, and that constant devotion to God and truth brings us the protection of nature's higher counterpart intelligence. We must remember that great light has been brought to this world through these intelligences in nature. The Quran was transmitted to Muhammad from the Lord by the angel Gabriel, that he may establish those who have believed, and as guidance and glad tidings to the Muslims. And it is also written, "It is beseemeth not a man that God should give him the scriptures and the wisdom and the gift of prophecy, and that he should say to his fathers, Be ye worshippers of me as well as of God, but rather be ye perfect in the things pertaining to God, since ye know the scriptures and have studied deep. God doth not command you to take the angels or the prophets as lords." The inspirers of our great poets and writers have been beings of nature. They have left symbols in humanity which, if properly used, will contact these different spheres of a higher and lower inspiration. Each man has within him a mandala or chart, which is a symbol showing his place and position in nature and resembles the map of his horoscope. The yogis of the East, with their clear vision, will present the student with his mandala or symbolic chart of his acquirements and his position in nature's consciousness. This marks a point in the student's initiations, and people who have acquired the art of drawing from their superconscious self often draw their own symbolic charts. We often see these mandala symbols in Tibetan paintings made by the initiated. However, the working and operation of these symbols is closely guarded by nature's administrators of the law. It is a globe of consciousness of the past, present, and future. In other words, it is a means of linking an atomic filament or line to the student, through which he contacts the intelligence in nature with which he is desirous of communicating. The reader must remember that the symbols we have here on Earth plane, when properly used, are energized by the intelligence of its higher counterpart symbol, and then the student knows that the line is working order. Each great nerve center in our body has its own symbol and is a receiving and transmitting station through which we contact nature. These centers are all linked up with our human brain. The making of his body receptive to these finer vibrations is always difficult for the student, and the law is that you cannot speak about a thing unless you can demonstrate it. Until one has attained to the knowledge of how to run his motor car, he cannot teach another the intricacies of its operation. When we pass through the doorway into nature's consciousness, we must remember our littleness, for this is the doorway of the bringers of light into this world of little perception. War is going on now in Europe and in China. All the nations are arming, and the people are already burdened with that taxation after these centuries of experience. Look, you, to what little perception man has attained. But nature's intelligence still vibrates her chord, and someday man will be at peace with his fellows and no longer destroy human life. Nature is severe and shuts down on man's power of perceiving the true, the beautiful, and the good until he shall witness and revolt at the horror of his own blood-stained hands. Avarice, hypocrisy, and greed are at his elbow, while his arms are burdened with the weight of his sword. Therefore, let us each assemble ourselves to become the instruments of peace. We have read about the dark ages of the past, and in the future people will read about the dark age of the present, when man was a destructive agent warring against his sovereign, the Lord God of truth, within. Where are the poets to sing again the ideals of chivalry and righteousness among men and nations? Suspicion and jealousy do not dwell in an honest mind or in an honest nation. Nations should follow the edicts of nature, which are that men or nations should stand alone, that men and nations should be honest and truthful, that men and nations must seek earnestly for the Lord God of truth within. When men and nations follow these precepts, they will feel the strength of these great laws of creation at their backs, and they will not, through wars and bloodshed, pass into oblivion. Poets, as stimulators of our ideals, should not forget that the pen is mightier than the sword. When Harriet Beecher Stowe, authoress of Uncle Tom's Cabin, met President Lincoln, he said, "So this is the little woman who caused this great war." Before a thing is destroyed, something better should be put in its place. The sovereign purpose of nature requires that man must first have the ideal of self-perfection before he will be able to perfect himself in his heart, mind, and body. He must have the aspiration for justice, truth within, before he can become truly just. He must remember that truth is the sword of justice, and that he must first find it within himself in order to recognize it in others. He must ever be prepared without hatred and without malice to strike the sword of justice when the cause of right demands, guarding well, however, that his stroke be ever short of vengeance or of oppression. And so you can see how beautiful the writings of M are from that particular book, The Lord God of Truth Within. And also, this discussion of Devas is just beautiful and fascinating. I honestly believe all around us we have all kinds of powerful intelligences, and I collect rocks and crystals, and it feels like each one is a massive intelligence. This could simply be the location of their consciousness spread out holographically. Some of the items and things and elements of nature around us could be more powerful than anything you could imagine. It's really interesting. I heard a story at my father's funeral from somebody that came up to me that talked about my grandfather, and they always saw him playing with elves and gnomes and fairies, and they would come out of this place where he would play in the backyard. And two people came up to me and said that they remembered this, and I always thought it was funny. But have you ever witnessed a gnome or fairy or diva or nature spirit or angel? Many of us have. I had a really interesting interview with Peter Sterling, who had visions of angels that help him to play his harp, and was very interesting. And we've discussed this in many different episodes on channeling. There are these other intelligences all around us in the astral realm, in the mental planes, in the devaconic realm, and we have learned from them. They've been around much longer. They've seen the tides. Now, there are Christians listening that are saying those are just evil demons that are getting into your head. And if you call upon them, as Carla did, if you challenge them in the name of Christ or the Christ consciousness or God or whatever you hold to be the highest power, they will go. Whenever you reach any intelligence, if you're sending it love, you change it into a being of love. It may vastly be changed. It may run away from you if it doesn't want the love, but you are a being of love. And so when you meet these intelligences, they can give you so much information. Some of the stuff about Ireland in here was fascinating, about the gnomes with pot bellies and frog-like legs. I think I've seen that in cartoons after he had said that. It's interesting how the archetypes of nature come through different writings. But who was them? I'd love to know. And have you ever communicated with the Devas? I believe as we move into fourth density, or we wake up in a fourth density new earth body, this new earth, part of the period, will be coming into an agreement with these intelligences, which we'll now be able to see and interact with much more clearly than we did before. They exist in a different vibration. And the recommendation of Quo, to understand where they're coming from a different vibration. They're here to help. They want to assist you, but they can't break your free will. So if you open up yourself, as I've done with my higher self, and you say, it is my free will that you communicate with me, that you can provide this information. And the more you do that, you're going to start to get some amazing intuitions, information, feelings, and visions. So I really enjoyed that. I hope that you did too. I got something out of it. So hoping that you all are having a magnificent, glorious day, and calling upon all the Devas to bless the people that are listening to this podcast with love, beauty, happiness, and peace and joy in every moment, expanding on outward. Take this joy and happiness that you get now and spread it throughout the world. All episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.